Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in Freshman English. We are in Unit 4, Star-Crossed Romances. Of course, we'll be studying Romeo and Juliet as a way to introduce you to the time of the Renaissance as well as to Shakespeare. I'm with you now on page 366 and following, the historical context, Elizabethan England. As we read, take notes. I'm hoping that some of this information that we will discuss here, we will be able to kind of flesh out in the study of Romeo and Juliet. Let's begin with Elizabethan England, shall we, on page 366. Just read along with me, annotate in your consumable as we go. Sometime, the rebirth of learning is the first heading. Sometime around the year 1350, circle the date, at the end of the Middle Ages, Italian city-states such as Venice and Genoa began to trade extensively with the East. With trade came more knowledge and growing curiosity about the world. Soon, Italy was leading the way in a flowering of European learning known as the Renaissance. Now again, circle it. We'll define the Renaissance in a lot of different ways, but one way to define it is the flowering of European learning. Commerce, science, the arts blossomed as people shifted their focus to the interest and pursuits of human life here on Earth. The astronomers Copernicus and Galileo questioned long-held beliefs to prove that the world was round and that it circled the sun, not vice versa. Navigators, of course Columbus comes to mind, as well as Magellan, braved the seas in tiny boats to explore new lands and seek new trade routes. Religious thinkers such as Martin Luther, John Calvin challenged the authority of the Roman Catholic Church, spurred the Protestant Reformation. Artists including Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci painted and sculptured lifelike human beings. Writers such as Cervantes as well as Shakespeare wrote insightfully about complex human personalities in fiction and drama. Let's go to the next heading, the Renaissance in England. The Renaissance was slow to come to England. The delay was caused mainly by civil war between the two great families or houses claiming the English throne, the House of York, the House of Lancaster. The conflict ended in 1485, circle that date, when King Tudor of the House of Lancaster took the throne as King Henry VII. After a successful rule in which England commerce expanded, he was succeeded by his son Henry VIII, whose reign was filled with turmoil. Henry sought a divorce from the Spanish Princess Catherine of Aragon so that he could remarry and possibly have a son. He was convinced that only a male would be strong enough to hold the throne. When the Pope refused to grant the divorce, Henry renounced the Roman Catholic Church and made England a Protestant nation. Ironically, his remarriage to a woman named Anne Boleyn produced not a son but a daughter, Elizabeth. Circle her name, she's huge, right? Even more ironically, when Elizabeth took the throne, she proved to be one of the strongest monarchs that England has ever known. Page 367, the Elizabethan world. The reign of Elizabeth I is often seen as a golden age in English history, treading a moderate and frugal path. Elizabeth brought economic and political stability to the nation, thus allowing commerce and culture to thrive. Advances in map-making helped English explorers sail the old world and claim lands anew. Practical inventions improved transportation at home. Craft workers created lovely wares for the homes of the wealthy. Musicians composed fine works for the royal court, and literature thrived, peaking with, of course, the plays of William Shakespeare. London became a bustling city on the busy river Thames, where ships from all over the world sailed into port. The city attracted newcomers from the countryside and immigrants from foreign lands. Streets were narrow, dirty, crowded, but they were also lined with shops where vendors sold merchandise from near and far. English women enjoyed more freedoms than did women elsewhere in Europe, and the class system was more fluid as well. To be sure, those of different ranks led very different lives, yet even the lowborn were able to attend one of the city's most popular new amusements, the theater. We do have a box here at the bottom of 367, Elizabeth I and the Spanish Armada. In 1588, it's a huge date, circle it. King Philip of Spain, some have argued it's the most important single date in the history of the world from the Western perspective, the birth of Christ. Let's take a look. In 1588, King Philip of Spain sent an armada or fleet of military ships to invade England. At the time, Spain was the most powerful nation on earth. Nevertheless, the English soundly defeated the invading forces. The victory cemented Elizabeth's popularity with her people. Prior to the battle, the Queen visited her troops to inspire them to fight. Here's a portion of the speech she delivered. She says, "And therefore I am come amongst you at this time, not as for my recreation or sport, but being resolved in the midst and heat of the battle to live or die amongst you all, to lay down for my God, for my kingdom, for my people, my honor and my blood, even the dust. I know I have but the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart of a king and of a king of England too." All right, let's go to page 368, theater in Elizabethan England. Elizabethan audiences included all levels of society, from the groundlings who paid a penny entrance fee to the nobility. During the Middle Ages, simple religious plays were performed in inns and castle halls on large wagons and pageants. In early Elizabethan times, acting companies still traveled the countryside to perform their plays. However, the best companies acquired noble patrons or sponsors who then invited the troops to perform in their homes. At the same time, Elizabethan dramatists began to use the tragedies and comedies of ancient Greece and Rome as models for their plays. By the end of the 16th century, many talented playwrights had emerged, including Christopher Marlowe, Ben Jonson, and of course, William Shakespeare. By the way, quick insight over on the side is that audience members ate and drank while they watched the plays and apparently made a lot of noise. In 1900, archaeologists found the remains of the foundation of the original Globe Theater. A picture of that is over on 369. They also found the discarded shells of the many hazelnuts audiences munched on while watching performances. Let's go to England's first theater. England's first successful public theater opened in 1576. Known simply as the Theater, it was built by an actor named James Burbage. Since officials had banned the performance of plays in London, Burbage built his theater in an area called Shoreditch, just outside the London city walls. Some of Shakespeare's earliest plays were first performed here, including the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet, would probably star James Burbage's son, Richard, as Romeo. A quick insight again to the left. During Shakespeare's day, acting companies were entirely male. This is huge. Women did not perform because it was considered improper. The roles of women were usually played by boys of about 11 or 12. That is before their voices changed. Tom Stoppar's great film, Shakespeare in Love, will play around with this idea as well. When the lease on the theater expired, just to continue, Richard Burbage, in charge of the company after his father died, decided to move the company to Southwark, just across the River Thames from London proper. The Shoreditch landlord had been causing problems, and Southwark was emerging as a popular theater district. During using timbers from the old theater building, Burbage had a new theater built, bigger, better than the one before. It opened in 1599 and was called the Globe. So, 1 year before 1600. It's an easy date to remember, right? Called the Globe. Under that name, it would become the most famous theater in the history of the English stage, for many more of Shakespeare's plays were first performed there. Now let's look at the layout of the Globe Theater on 369. Obviously, you've got a drawing there as well to help you through this. Theater layout. No floor plans of the theater or the Globe survive, but people's descriptions and sketches of similar buildings suggest what they were like. They were either round or octagonal, with a central stage open to the sky. The stage stretched out into an area called the pit, where theatergoers called groundlings paid just a penny to stand and watch the play. The enclosures surrounding this open area consisted of 2 or 3 galleries or tiers. The galleries accommodated audience members who paid more to watch the play while under shelter from the elements and with some distance from the groundlings. The galleries probably also included a few elegant box seats where members of the nobility could both watch the play and be seen by the masses. We think, of course, of modern stadiums where we have something similar going on, right? Where the really, really wealthy get to live and sit up in those box seats, and people that pay normal fees for a seat can see them up there, right? But never actually go up there. Staging the play is our next heading. The enclosure directly behind the stage was used not for seating, but for staging the play. Actors entered and left the stage front doors at stage level. These were called tiring houses, the dressing rooms and the like. The stage also had a trap door through which mysterious characters such as ghosts or witches could disappear. Suddenly, we'll see this in our study of Macbeth when we're seniors. Some space above the backstage area was used for storage or dressing rooms, again, tiring houses. The first gallery, however, was visible to the audience and used as a second stage. It would have been on a second stage like this that the famous balcony scene in the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet was performed. We'll get to that study, obviously. These open-air theaters did not use artificial light. Instead, performances took place in the afternoon when it was still light outside. There was also no scenery in the theaters of Shakespeare's day. Instead, the setting for each stage was communicated through dialogue. This is central to knowing how to read Shakespeare plays, because this is a reason why it's always being spoken about, what time of the day it is, and of course, we got to be able to say where we are, because there's not a lot of setting stuff going on either, right? Instead, the setting for each scene communicated through dialogue. With no need for set changes, scenes could follow one another in rapid succession. Special effects were simple. Smoke might billow at the disappearance of a ghost, for example. By contrast, costumes were often elaborate. The result was a fast-paced, colorful production that lasted about 2 hours. The Blackfriars. In 1609, Shakespeare's acting company began staging plays in the Blackfriars Theatre as well as the Globe. Located in London proper, the Blackfriars was different from the earlier theatres in which Shakespeare's plays were performed. It was an indoor space with no open area for groundlings. Instead, it relied entirely on the wealthier clientele. It was also one of the first English theatres to use artificial lighting, an innovation that allowed for nighttime performances. Let's turn the page to 370 and introduce ourselves now to the great Shakespeare himself, playwright, poet. Shakespeare's plays we read and poetry are regarded by many as the finest works ever written in English, and of course there are many who argue that his works are the greatest ever written in any language. Shakespeare, first of all, notice our dates. 1564 to 1616, widely revered as one of England's greatest writers. 4 centuries after his death, his plays are still read and performed every day. Who was this remarkable author of so many masterpieces? In actual fact, we know very little about him, although there's a big debate about this. Some people say we actually know quite a bit about him. In fact, we seem to know more about him than a lot of the other writers of his time. From Stratford to London. Shakespeare grew up in Stratford-upon-Avon, a busy market town on the Avon River, about 75 miles northwest of London. Church and town records indicate that his mother, Mary Arden, was the daughter of a wealthy farmer who owned the land on which Shakespeare's grandfather lived. Shakespeare's father, John, was a prosperous merchant who also served for a time as Stratford's mayor. Shakespeare most likely went to the local grammar school where he would have learned Latin and Greek as well as English and world history. He would eventually put all those lessons to use in plays about historical figures such as Julius Caesar, who we'll study in our sophomore year, and King Henry IV. In 1582, when he was 18, Shakespeare married a woman named Anne Hathaway and had 3 children with her, including a set of twins. The next decade of his life is a mystery, but by 1592, he'd moved to London, where he gravitated to the theater. Starting off an actor, he soon began writing plays as well, so write that down or circle that. Shakespeare was first an actor before he became a writer. In 1594, he became the principal playwright of the Lord Chamberlain's Men, the Burbages' acting company. Some of the early plays Shakespeare wrote at this time include the romantic comedy The Taming of the Shrew and the romantic tragedy The Tragedy of Romeo and Juliet, which we will be studying. Shakespeare was not just a performer and a playwright, however. He was also a part owner of the theater company. This meant that he earned money in 3 ways: from fees for his plays, from his acting salary, and from his share of the company's profits. Those profits rose substantially after the Lord Chamberlain's Men moved to the Globe Theater, where as many as, circle this, 3,000 people might attend a single performance. Wow. It was at the Globe that many of Shakespeare's later masterpieces premiered, probably beginning with The Tragedy of Julius Caesar in 1599. Of course, we think of 1600 as the year that he would have performed Hamlet for the first time. Many consider that his greatest play. We'll study that in our senior year. The King's Players is our next heading. In 1603, Queen Elizabeth died, and her Scottish cousin took the throne as James I. Partial to the theater, James was particularly supportive of the Lord Chamberlain's Men, which had emerged as one of the 2 best acting companies in the land. Not only did it have a brilliant playwright in William Shakespeare, it also had a fine actor in Richard Burbage, who starred in most of Shakespeare's plays. In 1606, flattered by the king's patronage, the company changed its name to the King's Men. It's believed that Shakespeare wrote his great Scottish play, The Tragedy of Macbeth, to appeal particularly to James I. When you study that play with me in your senior year, I've given those lectures at Lundstrong.net as well, but we'll talk about the political writing of Shakespeare. He's pretty genius in that play as it relates to a character named Banquo and James I. 3 years later, the King's Men began performing at the Blackfriars Theatre, using the Globe only in summer months. By using this indoor theatre in winter, the King's Men further increased profits. The company did so well that Shakespeare was soon able to retire. In 1610, he moved back to Stratford-upon-Avon, buying one of the finest homes in town. He died of unknown causes in 1616. We believe that the last of his plays, The Tempest, a 1611 production, was his last great play. Shakespeare says, Shakespeare's impact on the English language has been enormous. Not only did he coin new words, new meanings for old words, but he also used many expressions that have become part of our everyday speech, and then they give you just a few examples of this, right? The green-eyed monster from Othello means jealousy. Makes your hair stand on end is from Hamlet, that is to say it really frightens you. The taming of the shrew won't budge an inch, of course, means that you're not going to give in, you're going to stand firm. Now, when we turn to how to read Shakespeare on 372, right, Shakespeare wrote his plays in the language of his time. To the modern ear, however, the language can sound almost foreign. Certain words have changed meaning, fallen out of use. The idiom, slang, humor of 21st century America are very different from those of Elizabethan England. Even our way of viewing reality has changed. These differences present challenges for our modern-day readers of Shakespeare, and then, of course, some of the suggestions, beginning, of course, with, first of all, Elizabethan words. And the challenge here, of course, is that many of Shakespeare's words are now archaic, outdated. They will give you a strategy, familiarize yourself with some of the most common archaic words in Shakespeare, and if a word is completely unfamiliar, look to the marginal notes, obviously, in the translation, for a translation here, right? Challenge as well as the Elizabethan syntax. The syntax of the word order Shakespeare used may also be archaic. In contemporary English, the subject of a sentence usually appears before the verb. Shakespeare often inverts this order. So, for example, contemporary English syntax would say, what do you say? Elizabethan syntax can be, what say you? And the strategy here is if a sentence uses inverted syntax, identify its subject and then verb. Then rephrase the sentence, obviously, placing the subject before the verb. Another challenge is blank verse. Shakespeare uses both prose and verse in his plays. The type of verse he wrote is called blank verse. Blank verse, each line has 10 syllables, and each unstressed syllable is followed by a stressed one. If ever you disturb our streets again, you can hear this. If ever you disturb our streets again, that's that iambic ba-bum, 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 pentameter, right? Okay. And then often a single sentence will span more than one line of verse, especially true when Shakespeare uses a semicolon to connect two or more clauses together. With love's light wings that are approach these walls, and then notice the semicolon. For stony limits cannot hold love out. Now the strategies here is look for capital letters. This is a great suggestion. In marks to see where sentences begin and end. Read challenging sentences aloud. Good one, good one. When a sentence is made up of two clauses connected by a semicolon, ask yourself how the ideas in the clauses relate to each other. Another challenge is the Elizabethan worldview on page 373, right? In Shakespeare's day, society was rigidly organized. The nobility occupied the top rung of the social ladder. The uneducated peasantry occupied the bottom. It was difficult, if not impossible, to advance from one social class to another. The ladder of power also existed within families. Children could not determine their own lives or make their own choices. Their parents did so for them. Within a marriage, the husband was the master of his wife. We're going to have a lot of debate about why this is the case in this play, right? Elizabethan people expected to live shorter, more difficult lives. They understood the events of the life to be fated. They did not believe that they had the power to shape their own destinies as we do today. The strategy here is keep the Elizabethan worldview in mind as you read. If a character's attitude clashes with your own, try to set aside your own ideas. A great suggestion. Try to set aside your own ideas and view the situation through the character's eyes. This will help you to understand why the character's behaving or speaking in a certain way. They do give you some suggestions for how to read, a close reading there, and annotating the lines from Romeo to Juliet. Okay, so I'm going to let you take a look at that on your own. We'll now go to the background of the play on page 375. Star-crossed lovers. Written in 1594 or 1595, when Shakespeare was still a fairly young man, R&J is a play about young love. The basic plot's simple. Two teenagers from feuding families fall in love and marry against their families' wishes with tragic results. Of course, neither of the two families know they've actually married, right? The story's set in Verona, Italy, based on an Italian legend that was fairly well known in England at the time. Shakespeare's sources. Elizabethan writers deeply respected Italy as the birthplace of the Renaissance and often drew on Italian sources for inspiration. In 1562, an English poet named Arthur Brooke wrote The Tragical Fall of Romeo and Juliet, a long narrative poem based on the Romeo and Juliet legend. 3 years later, a prose version of the legend also appeared in England. Scholars believe, however, that Brooks's poem was Shakespeare's chief source. So in other words, what we're saying is that people came to the play, many of them knowing how the play was going to end. The poem contains a great deal of moralizing, stressing the disobedience of the young lovers along with fate as the cause of their doom. Shakespeare's portrayal of the young lovers is more sympathetic, but he does stress the strong role that fate plays in their tragedy. In fact, at the very start of the play, the chorus describes Romeo and Juliet as we've said, star-crossed lovers, indicating that their tragic ending is written in the stars or fated by forces beyond their control. Finally, the play Through the Centuries. Of all the love stories ever written, The Tragedy of R&J may well be the most famous. Acting celebrities down through the centuries have played the leading role. Edwin Booth, Ellen Terry, in the 19th century, for example, John Gielgud, Judi Dench. In the 20th century, there have been dozens of film versions of the play. We'll study several of them. Numerous works of art depicting its scenes, over 20 operatic versions, a famous ballet version by Tchaikovsky. We'll take a look at that as well. The play's often adapted to reflect the concerns of different eras. For example, West Side Story, we'll study about this as well. For example, adapts the story as a musical set amid the ethnic rivalries in the 1950s New York City. Romanoff and Juliet is a comedy of the Cold War set during the 1960s. One of the most recent popular adaptations was the 1996 film Romeo and Juliet, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes, which sets the play in the fictional location of Verona Beach, California, and we'll definitely study that one as well. All right, guys, enough introductions. Let's get on now to the actual work of Romeo and Juliet. Thank you.